Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Valerie Edwards with Fostering Families Today. March is National Social Work Appreciation Month, and this year's theme is Social Work Breaks Barriers. Later, we'll meet a social worker whose commitment on behalf of children in care goes above and beyond. We'll talk about why building and sustaining relationships is just part of the job. And the field of social work has been around since the 17th century. Times are changing, and so is the work of child welfare social workers. To find out how you can support and celebrate your favorite social worker, visit socialworkers.org. And as always, we invite you to weigh in on our conversation with our first poll question of the day. What makes an extraordinary social worker? While you do that, a reminder that today's webinar will be available for you online later today at fosteringfamiliestoday.com. And if you'd like to recognize a social worker, your favorite social worker, someone who you know is going above and beyond, why not drop us a line in the chat? Tell us where you're from and what makes your social worker special. Next slide. Fostering Families Today is a bi-monthly publication dedicated to informing, engaging, and educating foster, adoptive, and kinship families. Oh, here's the results of the poll question. Always has the latest information, someone I can count on. What's the top one? Bridges the gap between resource and biological families. Thanks for that. Thanks for voting. Let's see, where were we? Oh, Fostering Families Today is a bi-monthly publication dedicated to informing, engaging, and educating foster, adoptive, and kinship families. You can connect with us on the various social media platforms. And if you haven't done so already, why not take a minute to join the FFT Facebook group, Foster Parenting Toolbox. Right now, Dr. Anthony Estreet is with us. He recently joined the National Association of Social Workers as its new Chief Executive Officer. We'll talk about his priorities for the organization and what that means to those on the front lines. Dr. Estreet is a professor and a former chair of the Master of Social Work program at Morgan State University. He's also the Chief Executive Officer of Baltimore's Next Step Treatment Center, which provides substance use treatment and mental health services. Dr. Estreet earned a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology from Bowie State University, an MSW in social work at Virginia Commonwealth University, a doctorate in social work at Morgan State University, and an MBA at the University of Maryland, College Park. Dr. Estreet, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Valerie. I'm very excited to be here and to talk about social work. Happy Social Work Month to all social workers, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Exactly. Happy Social Work Month to all the social workers. I call them frontline workers. They're out there doing the hard work. And we at Fostering Families Today, Fostering Media Connection, we appreciate the work. We appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. I think one of the things that you started talking about is really, this is my new role. I've been here all of 8 weeks, and there's a lot going on in the social work profession. And really, I'm excited about where the association is going. I'm excited about where the profession is going. And really, I love these opportunities to get to chat and to really talk about social work.
Well, I was going to start with a hard question today, but I think I'll give you a softball question. And that is, I know it's 8 weeks on the job. We like to give you a grace period, but what are your priorities and your must-dos for the organization during your tenure?
Absolutely. And that is a great question. I think for me, one of the biggest things is really looking at the profession and how we can bring more recognition to the work that we do. Oftentimes, when we look at social work or we think about social work, sometimes it is painted in this negative kind of realm, as in, oh, social workers only take away kids. But we do so much more than that, right? And I appreciate your podcast and your magazine because it really talks about the work that social workers do within the child welfare system, and the work that we do is expansive in the child welfare system and beyond that. So really looking at how do we create better branding for social workers, so that social workers know and that people know that the breadth and the scope of social work is very wide. And then really looking at the workforce in terms of pay equity issues. So oftentimes people say that social workers are underpaid or the value of social work is often not there. So the pay is also not there. And I am a firm advocate that the work that we do is incredibly courageous, incredibly skilled, and that we need to be paid on par with our sister organizations that are getting paid to do similar work at a higher rate. And so for me, social work pay equity is going to be one of those high priorities for the association to really advocate for. The other part of it is really, again, falls under a workforce issue, and it looks at how can we increase the ability for social workers to practice across state lines. And so we recently just advocated for and had passed legislation for the Interstate Compact. That came at the end of February. And now we have about 5 states that are ready to put legislation forward for the Interstate Compact. And really that allows for social workers to be licensed in one state and to practice in other states without having to go through that long, arduous licensing process for that next state, as long as they met the requirements in their own state. And so really looking at how we can improve the workforce, the branding, and really the scope of social work are my priorities. And then lastly, really looking at how can we move policy forward around some of these really tough social justice issues that we are seeing. So when we talk about health disparities, when we talk about racial disparities and hate, when we talk about reproductive rights, when we talk about family rights, it's particularly when it comes to the child welfare system, really looking at legislation and how we can advocate and build coalitions with other organizations about how we can improve the work that we are currently doing and making it much more codified in legislation.
Well, you've made my job a little easier today because you've gone over everything that I wanted to talk about. Pay equity, licensing across state lines, addressing some of the issues that social workers face because they are on the front lines. I want to bring up something that one of our writers recently wrote about, and that is how agencies can support social workers, both mentally, their emotional health, their mental health. What can agencies do? And can it be codified?
It can be, right? And I'm so glad that you asked this question. This is also one of those things that I do talk about. And we're in social work month, so this is a great time to really talk about it, right?
Mhm.
And so what you're talking about is really how do we prevent burnout from the profession? And really, how do we prevent burnout? And sometimes people equate burnout to needing more self-care, and that's not a direct correlation. When we talk about burnout, we really have to start looking at those systematic things that are happening at agencies so that we can prevent burnout, right? And so that means looking at the number of cases that social workers have on their caseload, looking at our PTO policy, and are we giving people time off to recharge like they should be able to without feeling bad? Far too often, I hear a lot of my social work colleagues say, oh, I'm excited about going on vacation, but I'm also dreading going on vacation because when I come back to a whole litany of emails and things that just have not been done, right? And so they need a vacation from their vacation because they have to come back and do all this work. So really looking at our internal policies at organizations and how we are taking account in terms of, our social workers' mental health, their well-being, their caseloads, and really looking at the work that we do to make sure that it's not so burdensome that people do burn out and leave the profession. And so when you ask that question, I think that is a great question and one that we really need to start asking ourselves at the national level, but even at the organizational level, in terms of how do we start to look at how we're doing the work that we're doing and making sure that our workers are taken care of, that we are valuing their work and really centering their well-being in general so that they can continue to do the great work.
So what's the pushback? What barriers? What's stopping all of this stuff from being in place? It should have been in place before, quite frankly, because
Correct.
social workers for decades have been doing really hard work. And honestly, we hear some negative things about social workers. And so how do we make it not easier, but safer, both physically, emotionally, when they go out in the field? How do we make it safer for social workers?
That's a great question. We do a couple things. We certainly advocate, right? So we advocate at the national level. We advocate for social work safety. We at the last legislative cycle, we had the Social Work Reinvestment Act that really looked at how we can reinvest back into social work practitioners and really looking at this whole landscape of workforce. We've introduced legislation that around social work safety. We're actually we have a call out now for social workers to be a part of our basically rewriting our pamphlet on safety in the workplace for social workers. So I think that's a way for social workers to get involved. If they go to socialworkers.org, they're able to just look in our practice section, and they're able to, basically submit their name for consideration to be a part of that work group that's going to rewrite that and what that looks like. But to your point, I think it really boils down to legislation and budgeting, having the finances to do it. A lot of agencies will say there's just not enough funding to do that. There's just not enough funding. So really advocating, at the state level and the national level for more funding for social workers, for more funding for child welfare systems, for more funding for mental health, so that people can continue to do this good work and really focus on their well-being so that they can continue to serve the communities that they're in.
I got to tell you, I was doing some research for an article for the magazine. I was surprised to learn that not everyone who calls himself a social worker is truly a social worker, and that some states are using the police and retired military vets in place of social work. They're not calling them social workers, and I forget the term, but I wonder how that affects the job that the social worker, the caseworker, is doing, and is it doing any harm?
So that's an interesting question. And what you're talking about really is title protection. There are quite a few states that have title protection where you cannot call yourself a social worker unless you are licensed as a social worker. And the other part of that too is really when people are acting in the capacity or calling themselves social workers and they don't have the training skills, it does actually do harm to the profession. Oftentimes, whenever we hear about cases that have gone awry in the child welfare system or in the mental health system, sometimes a lot of those times people are saying the social worker, the social worker, social worker. And then when we look deeper into those situations, it may not have been a social worker. It might have been somebody with the title of social work working in a child welfare system that it just came out negatively, but social worker takes that hit for it. And the other part of it too is we also get portrayed that way in media. So if you've ever seen any movie that has portrayed a social worker, it always looks as though we are overworked, and it just really doesn't have a good image. And we as social workers, as the National Association of Social Work, have to do a better job of correcting that branding and that imaging and really showing that social work is more than just what we see on TV. And we do a lot of things from child welfare to AI and tech to working in corporate spaces around diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and accessibility. We are really, we say this a lot of times, social workers are everywhere.
Yeah, they are. I was surprised to learn they literally are everywhere, in the locker room, in the courtroom, in corrections. And I got to tell you, the more I look into it, the more I learn. I'm going to give you a softball question, because you've hit all my points so far today. COVID did a number on families, on agencies, on staffing. A lot of people left the field, and talk about recovering from that. Let's a couple of things I want to talk about. Has the field recovered in terms of folks back on the streets, boots on the ground, on the front line? In that respect, has the field recovered?
And so we are recovering, right? Just like any other profession, we are now operating in our new norm following COVID. COVID really did a number on the profession, on society, and people really are trying to recover from that. And so when I think about COVID, I think about, all those social workers that were still very, very much working in hospitals and mental health treatment centers, really on the front lines, like you said, and really having to experience firsthand the isolation, the millions of deaths related to COVID. And really, this really goes into that question around, self-care and how do we return from seeing such a traumatic pandemic. And so when you ask, where the profession is, we are recovering like everybody else. I think that social workers are definitely resilient in that we definitely take pride in self-care and really thinking about what we need to do the work and to be well. At that same time, we are looking at a growing profession. Our most recent data shows that by 2031, there's going to be close to 800,000 social workers. So the profession in and of itself is still very much growing. I am excited about the future of social work, and really the new social workers coming into the field. They're full of innovation and ideas, and really have the motivation and spirit to take us to that next level.
Okay, but for child welfare social workers, the field of child welfare lost a lot of families.
Mhm.
Lost a lot of families, and I know there were some deaths, there were some illnesses, families didn't recover on a personal level, but that left a lot of kids with nowhere to go. How do you bounce back from that? I mean, nationwide, I don't think there was a state that was untouched in that regard.
No, absolutely. And so, part of that is really workforce development and training. There are a lot of great training programs within schools of social work that are currently training new child welfare workers. A lot of those programs have Title IV funding that allows for them to work in child welfare systems and get that training. And then really once they graduate from their programs, they can enter child welfare systems and be, have the expertise and the training to be able to work with children and families that are in the child welfare system. And so I think it's really to your question is, it's a slow build back in terms of building that workforce, particularly those that are able to work in that child welfare system.
Is the field of social work in general, particularly those who work with vulnerable populations and not just child welfare, are we ready for the next emergency, the next pandemic, the next epidemic, the next whatever that hits? Can we be ready?
And so I think that yes, we can be ready, right? And I think that for us, for the field of social work, we have to really start, thinking and becoming proactive in a lot of situations, right? So really thinking about what did we learn from COVID? What did we learn from Hurricane Katrina? What do we learn from all these natural disasters, and how do we better prepare? But at the same time, also recognizing that social work is already here. We are already on the front lines. We are already the ones responding when we have these national pandemics and crises. And so we have the skill sets to be of use currently. And at the same time, we also are at the table and thinking about how do we get ready for the next thing? How do we plan and prepare proactively so that when things do happen, we're ready to deploy. And so we have certainly social workers that are working around crisis intervention and natural disasters, but in that same sense, really allowing one of those key things is going to be the interstate compact, right? Because that does release social workers from having to apply to that state or that area where the natural disaster is occurring, and they will then be able to help out and deploy to those areas to provide more services. And so I think this is an exciting time because at the same time, we really get to be innovative and really think about what does disaster response look like in social work and how can we prepare? I mean, to be fair, I don't think there's any way to prepare for a pandemic that we didn't see coming.
Yeah.
But at the same time, for natural disasters that we do have experience in, I do think that it does provide an opportunity for us to really think and be innovative in how we respond for the next time it happens.
Okay, you've hit all the points I had. You ran through my questions like a pro, and I appreciate that. Explain to me what you mean by social work breaks barriers.
Oh, I love that this is one of those themes that is just timely right now. We are in a very complex legislative cycle. And so when we talk about social work breaks barriers, this is exactly what we're talking about. Social workers are breaking barriers when it comes to advocating for our most vulnerable populations. And more recently, we've seen legislation after legislation come out that is anti-trans, anti-LGBTQIA. They are talking about removing DE&I from different states. They are talking about reproductive rights, the Dobbs decision. So when we talk about social work breaks barriers, that's what we're talking about: social workers advocating and talking to their legislators and really pushing the agenda that there is humanity and equity that needs to be acknowledged in a lot of these spaces. And so when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, when we talk about social work ethics, when we talk about the spirit of the profession, this is really where we are shining. And this is one of the things that really gets me excited about social work and the time for me to take this role is that this is the time for social work to really step up. This is our time as a profession to really lead the conversations around why all of these different issues are important and why we as a society should pay attention, right? And so the more we see these these anti-trans, anti-LGBTQIA legislative and the removal of D&I, the more we think back of how history is important, how we've seen this done before, and how if we're not careful, we're going to repeat that. So the more that we're able to advocate, the more we're able to make our voices heard as a society about what we want to see for our future, I think this is what we mean when we talk about breaking barriers.
Thank you very much. Dr. Anthony Street, before we let you go, would you like to leave a word of encouragement or advice to any of the social workers who may be watching us this morning?
Absolutely. I again want to tell you happy Social Work Month. I know we are close to the last day tomorrow. If you have not had an opportunity to take some time to celebrate yourself and to practice some self-care, please do that. And please, if you are not a member of NASW, I would love to have you join our membership and really join the ranks so that we can advocate nationally for the things that we need to see within our profession.
We look
I was going to say, Valerie, I want to thank you for having me on.
We look forward to having you with us before. As always, we welcome submissions from those in the field who are on the front lines. We love hearing from social workers who work on behalf of children throughout the country. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being so open and honest about your goals and what your plans are for the organization. I look forward to talking with you more because I have a tendency to call on people from time to time. Thank you very much. Dr. Anthony Street, thanks for spending a little bit of time with us this morning.
Thank you and have a great day.
You too now. Well, we put out a call to find social workers who go above and beyond and found one right here in our own backyard. Candy Vetters is a social worker who works in Bremerton, Washington, whose extraordinary commitment to children and care was brought to our attention by one of our very own columnists, Dion Joseph. Candy is a wife, a mother of 4, grandmother of 7, and currently works with the Department of Children, Youth, and Families in Washington State, where she began her career in June 2017. Candy is also the lead social work in Kitsap County's relatively new infant and toddlers court program called Safe Babies Court. She graduated from Washington State University in 2011 with a bachelor's degree in human development and a minor in psychology. Candy refers to herself as an anomaly in this field and among social workers, describing herself as very conservative politically and religiously. However, Candy says she finds common ground everywhere she goes as the wonderful people in this arena work together for the welfare of our most vulnerable, our children. Joining us is Dion Joseph. Some of you may be familiar with her. Dion Joseph, she writes for Fostering Families Today. She writes a column called All the Little Things. She is also a member of Washington State's Parent Advisory Group, a conference speaker, and family and child advocate. Dion is a transracial adoptee who has been a foster parent since 2016. A biological, adoptive, and foster mom, Dion and her husband, Sean, currently parent 7 children in the Pacific Northwest. Thank you, Candy, for being with us today, and Dion, too, for being with us today. Always a pleasure to see the faces behind the work.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, indeed. How long have you two known one another?
Candy, you want to take that?
Since I had the privilege of placing one of our foster children in Dion and Sean's home. And I think that was July or August of last year.
You got it. August of 2022. And I think our relationship has really grown, at least professionally since then. So it's excited to talk to you here.
Look, hold on, guys. Give me a moment because I want to invite our listeners. If you have a social worker that you know who goes above and beyond like Candy does, why not drop us a line in the chat? We'd love to recognize social workers today for Social Work Appreciation Month. Tell us where you're from. You don't have to give your social worker's name, but tell us what makes your social worker extraordinary. How would you guys describe your relationship? Okay, somebody. Don't leave me.
Well, okay. Candy, you want to go first?
Sure. Our relationship, I think, went from purely professional to a trusting relationship with a great deal of appreciation on both sides.
That's great to hear. Were you surprised, Deanna, at how easily your relationship developed?
I think, from my experience as a foster parent, whenever you're receiving a new child, everything is new. The whole package that comes with that child is big, and it's full of discovery. Their family, the workers, the team, the plan. And so I was excited to meet Candy. I didn't know where it would go, and extraordinarily impressed and grateful for her commitment to the children that she cares for, to the families that she cares for. And so just like she said, that sense of trust, I mean, this is like a massive parenting network that this becomes, all of us kind of working together to get a family to a safe place. And so trust is necessary. And if that's not there, it could be really difficult. And she's just a woman with a lot of integrity and commitment to her job. And that makes my role as caregiver kind of easy.
Wow, Candy, that says a lot. That's a phenomenal way to honor the work that you do. Are you surprised when I asked for people to send us the name of an extraordinary individual? Were you surprised that Dion sent us your name?
I was very surprised, yes.
Why? I mean, you can hear in her voice the commitment, the passion that she has for what you two. In fact, we have in our chat, Angela, I'm not sure where she's from, but says, I know these two women and they are phenomenal. Why surprised?
I don't consider myself to be phenomenal. I look around me every day, and the workers that I work shoulder to shoulder with and back to back with sometimes, and I see so much phenomenalism. I see so much integrity and passion and compassion. I'm surrounded by people who love the work that they do and who are committed to it. I don't see myself as any different from any of them.
What drew you to social work in the first place, Candy?
I kind of meandered into social work, which is kind of funny because I was also a foster child, and I was in relative care with paternal grandparents until I was about 12 years old, and then I was returned to my father's care. I started my journey in long-term care, actually. I have a real passion for the elderly, maybe because I was raised by grandparents, but I started as a caregiver in home, and then actually worked my way up as a Medicaid biller at a long-term care facility while I was going to school. And when I graduated in 2011, my boss at the facility asked me if I wanted to work as a social worker because their worker was retiring. And so he offered me a position as social worker in the long-term care facility. I loved it. I still love it. I still have a real heart for hospice and for families who are supporting their elderly. but I think I needed something different. And so I started, I worked for West Sound Youth for Christ, which is now Olive Crest, as a visit supervisor, and kind of got a taste for what foster care looked like. And when I finished my college education, my internship, I was able to choose DSHS, which is what DCYF was at the time. And I did my internship with the Bremerton office and just fell in love. And that's kind of how I ended up here.
And you stayed. And I'm sure Dion speaks so highly of you. I'm sure she's glad you did stay.
Yeah, one thing I'd love to add that that I think is good to know is I'm a word person, and so the etymology of the word social actually comes from the Latin word that means friend. So this is friend work. And I think one of the things that makes a social worker good, if they are a good friend to the people in their care, which means being firm, holding them accountable, being loving, giving good advice and wisdom. And I would say walking through this journey with Candy, I mean, she's the one in charge of the kids that we love in our home. And so her managing of her role directly affects kind of everything in our home. And I would say Candy is good at friend work. She's good at understanding our family and that dynamic. She's good at understanding the biological families that she serves. And I think that's something going forward. Maybe even Dr. Istreet could think about that too for the marketing and the branding, that this is friend work, being a good friend to people when they need it.
Exactly. I think that goes above and beyond what's on that job description, Candy. I think they should add a section. I like that, what Dion just said, but I don't think that that's what they were counting on. I'm sure that they know what a treasure they have in you. Candy, I read somewhere that at the heart of every social worker is someone who empowers others, influences change, and makes a difference in the lives and in the communities they support. Is that what you're doing?
I suppose you could look at it that way, and it's sort of a meta viewpoint. That's not how I view it when I am face to face, hand to hand with a client or a child or a family. My first and always conscious focus is what are the needs and how do I meet them? So if for some reason I am encouraging or moving people forward in growth, that, on a one-to-one individual basis, that's always my goal. I think it does play out as people do grow and mature and gain more self-actualization, that it affects society in a large way. And I appreciate the question, because your question gave me an opportunity to kind of take a step back and look at it from the 10,000 foot view and recognize that what we do as social workers in a very great way accomplishes all of those.
Talk about something that's important to this relationship. And when I introduced the show, I talked about the communication between the two of you. And I don't want to let the moment go by without both of you telling me and helping anyone who's listening understand, how do you improve and grow and strengthen that relationship between the two of you? Dion, you want to start us off?
Yeah, speaking from the perspective of a caregiver, we have to remember our role in this, the communication piece, the being open, the being transparent, asking for help, and keeping everybody in the loop for the kids that they're in charge of as well. And so communication is obviously something that I enjoy. So that is a fun thing for me to be able to include Candy and the rest of our team in emails or texts or phone calls. We get an opportunity to visit each other once a week in our once a month in our home so they can see the children. And I enjoy and welcome that kind of communication because I really feel like I'm part of a team that's working to bring some sort of permanency and reunification to the kids that we're all caring for. And Candy makes that easy. I mean, obviously it's a partnership, with a lot of different people. And so if the people in the partnership aren't coming with that same kind of transparency or availability, then it gets difficult. And so I appreciate that I've been able to, I've contacted Candy all the ways. She's called me immediately when there's information to share. I can text her. We have an ongoing email way. She's been so responsive to the needs that I've had. So I just appreciate that. So it's a it's a relationship.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
caregiver needs to be open and available, and social worker needs to be open and available. And in this case, we have those pieces.
Candy, tips on strengthening and building that relationship that Dion talks about so passionately. What would you tell our listeners today?
I think for myself, I work hard to find commonalities, common ground, ways to connect. That was super, super easy with Dion and her family. We just seemed to kind of click.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to strengthening that relationship, I think one of the things that I wish more families understood is that social workers we're basically an avenue to resources.
Mm-hmm.
We're not the bad guy. We have a job to do, and we're all doing our best to do that job, sometimes under really difficult circumstances. I know working with relative caregivers, there's a very difficult dynamic that has to be walked with respect towards family members, their personal culture, their ethnic culture, their religious culture, and every family has its own unique way of communicating. And I think social workers need to be very aware of that. We all need to be able to recognize our own biases and address those so that they don't become barriers to communication. But I think Dion really hit the nail on the head. Communication is the key. And if we can communicate openly and honestly and respectfully, that is the most important thing. Always be curious. That's my mantra. When I walk into a situation where I'm uncertain or a little insecure sometimes, to be honest, I allow my curiosity to take the reins, and I ask respectful questions, because if I don't know, then how can I actually address the needs of the moment? And I think Dion will probably agree with this, but I'm something of an over communicator. If there's an email from somebody that I see that I haven't read, I get anxiety about it. I'm like, oh, I need to read that email. I need to read that text. I need to answer that voicemail. But that's, I think, really the key. Respect, kindness, and understanding. That's really big. But communication with all of those things is tantamount.
That's sort of humbling, Candy, in some ways, to be able to look into one's self and recognize one's biases and recognize that one is not always the expert in any given situation, and put that aside in working on behalf of children. Where does that come from? Because you can't learn that in a classroom. That's not on any, and I've been to a lot of colleges, and I have as yet to see that on anyone's curriculum. How do you do it?
I think a lot of it comes from my own personal background, because as I said, I was a foster child. I went through a lot of transitions. Most of them were not easy or thought through with the best interest of the child at heart, and experience, because I've made some mistakes. I've traipsed into situations and mishandled them and paid the price, both in my own conscience and in the relationships that I would have done better to develop. And I think the school of hard knocks has that curriculum more than any other school does.
Full of hard knocks. Yeah, they're giving out degrees in that one. We have a message in the chat room. Let's see, from Multnomah County. Our social work, and this comes from KC. Our social worker, Carly and Sabrina, have been amazing. We just adopted our daughter from foster care, and Carly was always so helpful to our daughter's bio mom. She would bring her food from the food bank every week and really help us facilitate visits with the mom who was not always interested in visiting with her daughter. She helped keep her healthy and safe so we could keep contact with our daughter and her bio family, which is very important to us. We're going to get back on that one, ladies. Sabrina was our adoptive worker and has also been so great in helping the bio mom and being there for us. We have had the best relationship with these last two workers, and we have such a beautiful story with them. Thank you from Casey for sharing that with us. And that is what it's all about, isn't it? It's connecting with one another. It's connecting family with family. It's bridging the gap. I want to invite anyone else who's watching who has something they'd like to share about their social worker as we celebrate National Social Work Appreciation Month. I'm sorry it took us so long in the week. I don't know if there's a party going on for social workers somewhere and we didn't get so late in the month. We didn't get the invite, but I want you to know that we're celebrating you right now. Casey talked about keeping that contact between the child and the bio mom. How do you make that happen? Sometimes, Dion, Candy, these situations can be very difficult. Any advice for our listeners?
I want to key off something that you brought up with Candy, which is that humility piece.
Oh.
Walking in humility and respecting someone else's role and who they are and their humanity is massive. And I think if you can keep that first and foremost, someone's humanity, and interact with that with humility, you know, that there's no, we have different roles, and there is a beautiful way as a community we can wrap around people who are most vulnerable, really, and use the strength that we have to lift and elevate, which is, I think, what everyone in this group, in this discussion, is working to do. I think that can go a long way.
It does. Well, any last words before we say goodbye to both of you? If you're just joining us today, social worker Candy Vetters and Fostering Families Today columnist Dion Joseph are with us as we wind up Social Work Appreciation Month. Any last words before you go? Oh, we have a question in the chat before I let you go, guys. Always a question. This comes from Ms. Huger. Can you speak to the impact that race has on decision-making in child welfare? How can we as social workers minimize this as a barrier to reunification or permanency for children?
If it's okay, I'd like to address that.
Oh, of course, you're the experts here.
I think that's a phenomenal question, and I think it's one that we need to have at the forefront of what we do. It's data proven that families of color are unequally noticed in child welfare. And I think the most important thing as a social worker for me is to go back to what I said earlier, to look at my own biases, to address the trauma in my own history, to heal from that, and then to allow that healing to push me forward with a passion to push back against racism and against inequality and inequity. And we do that on a one-to-one basis, face-to-face first. We do that in our own relationships, in our own families, and then we expand that into our communities and our neighborhoods and into our state, and then hopefully beyond that.
Dion, you want to weigh in on that in your experience?
Well, I just want to say, do you see why she's an exceptional social
I
worker?
do. I
I
see.
mean, just that, again, that accountability piece. How are we acknowledging our biases? How
Yeah.
are we interacting just on a personal level instead of even shoving it off and making it something out there that they need to do?
Yeah.
What can you do right now today in your home? Because we all have blind spots. And I think that that goes a long way, again, to improving relationships and seeing people as people and being their friend, doing the hard work of being a good friend to somebody when they need it.
I think Michael Jackson said it first. I'm starting with the man in the mirror.
There you go.
You got to look at yourself first. Candy and Dion, thank you so very much for being with me today. But stick around because we got a lot more coming up. I don't want to go, as you guys can see, we've got another comment in the chat. I'm going to say goodbye to you too, but stick around. We've got some more coming up. Let's take a look at, this comes from Jacqueline Leonard. As a former foster youth, I want to acknowledge my county social worker, Elizabeth from Los Angeles County in California. She went above and beyond with my family and all those years I was in care. I'm a caseworker now, and as an adult, will always be grateful for her for inspiring me and being an amazing worker for those 10 years when she was my worker. Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you for sharing that with us. I love to hear from people who, you know, Dr. Street talked about, we hear negative stuff about social workers. I love when we hear from people who say that my social worker was more than just a numbers cruncher or a pencil pusher, but that someone really impacted and changed their life. Candy, that's you. That's you. You're out there doing it. You're out there. Stick around, guys. We've got someone else I want you to meet. One of my favorite people. Our next guest is a former caseworker. Deborah Diane Denzel spent 13 years in the Connecticut foster care system and exited after graduating with her Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from Bennett College. Deborah has direct service experience as a state foster care worker, foster parent recruiter, trainer, program manager, and mentor. She earned her Master of Social Work from the University of Michigan and has dedicated her career to improving the child welfare system. Deborah also has experience as a program evaluator and researcher and conducted numerous research studies on child welfare at the University of Massachusetts, the University of Michigan, and Think of Us. Deborah is currently the Business Development Manager for those of us here at Fostering Media Communications, recently relocated to Los Angeles, where she looks forward to continuing her child welfare advocacy work in the county with the largest number of children impacted by the child welfare system. She's also one of my favorite people, so it is a pleasure to have Deborah with me today. Thank you so much, Deborah. And if you didn't know that before, I'm telling you now, you're also one of my favorite people. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for a lovely introduction and for those words and finding out I'm one of your favorite people. The feelings are mutual, so thank you.
So good to have you. You have such a rich and varied work life and personal life, but I want to talk about the professional first. Is there any such thing as a typical day in the life of a child welfare worker?
You know, there are key responsibilities for the role of a child caseworker. And some of those include, as many people who are in child welfare are aware, those include interacting with families. So those home visits, either for the foster child, foster parent, biological parent, those include lots of writing reports, right, for the case, for courts. So there's a variety of responsibilities, and you can have your day planned out. You can think that, all right, today I'm going to visit A, B, and C, and then I'm going to write this report. And so this idea of a typical day, I think that there are responsibilities that we are aware of, but the day can be planned out and it can drastically change because something can come up, there can be an emergency. And so I think it's important to just, you know, when you answer that question, there's those responsibilities that are typical and we're aware of. But the day-to-day can drastically change within minutes.
I hear you. Turn on a dime. Now, Deborah, you describe yourself as a former caseworker, but you've never really left the field. I know you're on the business side now. And in a previous conversation, I remember you saying that this is a lifelong commitment for you. Why is that?
Yeah, I think that one of the obvious is my personal background, growing up and aging out of the system. I think that growing up, I never imagined being in the field and doing the work that I'm doing. It wasn't until actually after undergraduate from Bennett College for Women that I was doing a post-bac program. And I thought that I would do actually psychology. I got my undergraduate in psychology. I thought I would be a child psychologist, and still that decision was impacted by my childhood. But it was through my research that I found my answer. I found my calling. I found that if I really want to make an impact, that it was going into the field of social work. And then through my different experiences in several roles that you mentioned, I had those experiences and I reflected on how can I make a larger impact. So my career started off as a caseworker, as a foster care worker my career started in Michigan. And so as a foster care worker for the county, transitioning into it. And with that role, I felt like the impact that I really wanted to make from my knowledge, from my experiences, from the skills, the education I had, I felt like my hands were really tied in that role. And so that is how I transitioned into the different roles that I've had over my career leading up to what I do now.
And you're still in it. You're still in it. You're still working on behalf of vulnerable children everywhere, and we appreciate it. I appreciate it. We appreciate it. Okay. And I want to invite our listeners, if you're joining us today, we're celebrating National Social Work Appreciation Month. It's the end of the month. We don't want to miss the party. We want to say thank you to those of you who are out there doing the hard work, those of you who are on the front lines. If there's a social worker in your life who's gone above and beyond, let us hear about it. Let us give a shout out to our national audience. Tell us where you're from and how this social worker impacted your life, or you don't have to give your name if you're not comfortable doing so, but we'd love to hear from you. Deborah, I read somewhere that a good child welfare worker does more than what's in their job description. You've been on both sides of the desk. What's been your experience?
I love that question. I really, really love that question, because I think that is where and how we can make a larger impact. And so I'll start off actually from my personal experience. And so as a foster youth, there were things that my caseworker and the caseworkers that worked with my caseworker did. And you might be wondering, wait, what do you mean by that? I'm going to tell you. So there are things that they did that wasn't necessarily in their job description, that wasn't, required, that their agencies, their government was saying, you have to do this, but they did it because they cared, because they wanted to show up for me. And also, I recently actually received my foster care case file and looked through it, and some of the perceptions that I had of my experiences were confirmed. Like, wow, I actually do have good memory. I was correct on that. And some of them were challenged. And so in this area of my perception and viewpoint of my caseworker, I actually was able to see even more that they did that was going above and beyond on my behalf. And so some of that included advocating for me in some of the notes that I saw, and also remembering from my memory. There were times that they advocated for me, either when they were, talking to my foster care placement, my foster parents, advocating and helping them understand, and having the knowledge and the tools to be able to care for me. And then there were some additional things. And so, like I said, I grew up and I aged out of the system, and I graduated with my bachelor's from Bennett College for Women. And that was around the time that my case was coming to a close. And this is just one example of my social worker, who I had for several years, showed up to my graduation. I'm from Connecticut. She drove all the way down to my graduation in North Carolina. And not only did she physically show up and celebrate me, but so did a colleague of hers that I have interacted with over the years. And I mean, there's so many other examples. Even when I went off to college 4 years prior, my caseworker went down there. She brought me down. She set me up. She got me what I needed. She stood around for a little while. And so those are some examples of things that my caseworkers over the years and in my experiences, they went above and beyond of what was asked of them. And on the flip side of that, as a caseworker myself, there were things that I reflected on of my own childhood that I knew was important when I was interacting with the kids on my caseload. And so one of those examples include, I had one of those things that was a challenge when I was younger was that when I transitioned from foster home to foster home, oftentimes I was not prepared. I was not told I would have that transition. It was showing up at school, having me, in transition, having my things in trash bags in the trunk and transitioning me to the next home. And so as a foster care worker, it was my mission to help as much as I could with those transitions for the youth that I served. And so in one example, I helped a young kid who we received a 30-day notice from their residential home that they needed to be removed. And I talked with the kid about it. And I said, what kind of home would you like to, what kind of setting would you like to live in? And I actually, took that child to another residential home and said, what do you think about this home? Which the next one would meet more of their needs. And we had that discussion. So when it was day to move, they were prepared. They felt like they had a sense of control. They had a say. And then when we actually, made that move, there's a lot of emotions that come up in that moment for that child. And so it's not just dropping you off and getting out of here, although, right, the expectation and the responsibilities will have a caseworker needing to drop that kid off and immediately hopping over to do the next task. But anyways, in closing, I think that, staying with that child, talking with that child, just even for just a little while longer, allowing that child both, being vulnerable, having empathy, can go a long, long way. And so those are just some examples.
Well, when Dr. Street talked about rebranding the organization, I think listening to yourself and our previous guests, Candy and Deanna, I think we need to put in there mentor. I think we need to put in there inspirer. Is that a description? Inspirer. I'll ask Dion later if that's a word. Supporter, encourager, and because I know that the job is so much more than the job description. And if no one told you today, if no one told Candy, if no one told any social worker out there who's listening, if no one has said to you, thank you, job well done, let me say it right now. Deborah, we're almost out of time, but I don't want to leave without asking you a final question. What advice, if any, do you have for our parents who may be watching? What steps can they take to ensure a good relationship with their child's caseworker?
And also thank you for those kind words again. I think that, I think earlier Candy and Dion did a really good job of highlighting the importance of communication. And so I just want to echo that, that communication on both ends is really, really, really key, really important. And part of that communication, I think, is as a foster parent, foster family, is making sure that you are asking the questions so when you ask, what is something that, you know, a foster parent could do on their behalf, is asking those questions, making sure that you have the knowledge and understanding of what's going on. And not being afraid to do that. I know I've had my own experiences with foster parents who have a diverse, you know, experience of what this, I'm not sure if the call has ended, but I'll finish this point of just the importance of asking questions. And lastly, I'll say is making sure that we are holding our caseworkers accountable and holding our systems accountable, but specifically our caseworkers accountable with grace. And I know we're short on time, so I'll just kind of end it there.
I like that. Deborah Denzel, always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for being with us today. Thank all of our guests. That's it. That's it for today's webinar from Fostering Families Today. You'll find a link in your mailbox and it'll be posted on our website later today. Feel free to share with friends and colleagues. Thanks to our guests for joining us. Their contact information is below. We see it up there on the screen. If you'd like to reach out, we'll have that on our website as well. We'll also have some links to follow, including one which discusses how to strengthen the relationship between child welfare professionals and the families they serve. Finally, big thanks, shout out to the folks behind the scenes who make these webinars work. There you go. There we are. That's the team at Fostering Families Today. Join us again next time and throughout the year for more interesting conversations. Register for any of our webinars at fosteringfamiliestoday.com. And if you've got an idea for a webinar, we want to hear from you. You can reach us at info@fosteringmediaconnections.org. And I can't leave without saying we are always on the lookout for families to feature on the covers of our magazine. We need to hear from you. If you're out there and you read the magazine, why not send us a photo? Send us a family photo and just tell us a little bit about yourself. 1 or 2 lines, maybe 3 or 4 lines, okay? In the meantime, stay up to date with news and information from our sister publications, Youth Voices Rising and The Imprint. Until next time, I'm Valerie Edwards. Have a great day, everyone.